Hi everyone, welcome to this very special edition of the Rugby Roundtable. My name is Sean Phelan, and if you don't know who I am the face behind Philly Boots, the grassroots rugby player exchange. Just want to welcome everyone to our viewers on Facebook Live, who have been with us for the last 8 weeks, but also for the first time to our viewers on Twitter and YouTube. So if you haven't seen a Rugby Roundtable before, we normally chat with 3 or 4 people about an issue in the grassroots game, and we share ideas, and we have a great discussion, and hopefully people learn from it. But today is slightly different. Today we are going to be hosting a Q&A with the Rugby Development Director of the RFU, Mr. Steve Granger. How are you, sir?
Yeah, not bad at all, Sean. Thanks. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Thanks for giving him. I really appreciate it. This is probably going to be sort of the. I'm not an interviewer, so this is probably going to be sort of the biggest thing that we do here on the roundtable. So I just wanted to thank you for giving up your time. So yeah, where should we start? How has lockdown been for you, for the RFU, in sort of the last few months? In a nutshell, really.
Yeah, it's been pretty challenging, hasn't it, for all of us? I mean, we just got the Wales weekend of the Six Nations through the both games there, and then to go into to lockdown, which I think many of us just expected it to be a few weeks or a few months. The quick decision that we had to take to sort of close down the domestic season, which I know many sort of weren't too pleased about at the time, but I think clearly with the whole country going into lockdown a week later, it turned out to be the right decision. We haven't really been in the office since then. Many people probably aware Twickenham's been turned into a testing centre. It's been a pretty challenging few months from a lot of fronts. And as we get closer to the start of what would normally be the next season, things get even more challenging, I think, for all of us. But the way that the rugby community has responded, the way that clubs and volunteers managed to lock down facilities and clubs has just been unbelievable. And then to see many of the great things that clubs have done in their local communities, we just got to hope that once we do get back to some degree of normality, that those communities will pay back that support to those individual clubs.
Yeah, hopefully there's some great stuff going on in the clubs. People are doing some brilliant things, whether it's been doing the shopping for vulnerable people, or hosting quizzes to raise money for the club. I think actually what has been going on in the club game has been incredible. So shout out to everyone involved in that. So the format of tonight is that Steve has very kindly given up about 45 minutes of his time to answer your questions, really, and perhaps give some clarity on a few things that in and amongst the RFU, to rugby, and a few other things that going on. But if you want to ask a question, please just comment, put it in the comments, put it in the chat, put it underneath the Twitter post with video, and we will do our very best to get these questions answered. So yeah, I guess we get into it now, and I guess we start with the biggest elephant in the room, and this is probably the most requested question. Is now that a lot of people, a lot of good people have lost their jobs. What is the structure of the community game going forward?
Yeah, let me start with a little bit of context on it and the reasons why we've had to make the changes that we've made. And nobody ever wants to restructure organisations, remodel organisations, and most of all make people that are colleagues and have in many cases become friends redundant. But I think what it might help just to do is just understand the financial impact on the RFU. The RFU is no different really than any other rugby club. We generate the revenue from activity that happens on the pitch, largely at Twickenham, and off the pitch activities largely at Twickenham. So whether that's Six Nations matches, autumn internationals, whether it's conferences, exhibitions, food and beverage sales, etc. And clearly with no rugby happening and no off-field activity happening, the impact on revenue has been massive. So the revenue was down for the last quarter of the 2019-20 year by about 15 million. And the projections for the current financial year that we're in, so our financial year runs from the 1st of July to the 30th of June, the revenue projections are down somewhere between 60 and 107 million. And from a context point of view, revenue this year was predicted to be somewhere between 150 and 160 million. So you can see those figures they're seismic. And all of our projections are that this is going to take between 4 and 5 years to recover from. So there will be a residual effect of somewhere between 15 and 20 million a year for the next 4 to 5 years. So we've had to look at reducing the cost base of the organisation, and that impacts right across the board. Unfortunately, as an organisation, we end up with quite a high fixed cost base in some areas. So as an example, the thing that helps us generate all the money is owning our own stadium, Twickenham. But the thing that costs a lot of money to keep operating nowadays is that same stadium, Twickenham. It's an aging asset, it's depreciating, it needs a lot of maintenance. And if it isn't generating revenue, then the cost is still there. To bring in the revenue, work with commercial partners, do broadcast deals, you can't cut those sorts of investments. 95% of our revenue is generated from the England senior men's team. So people then ask questions about, well, why aren't we reducing the money to the professional game and the high performance end of the game? Ultimately, that's the revenue generator. So we've had to make reductions right across the organisation. However, the community rugby piece, the rugby development piece, has taken a disproportionate hit. There's no doubt about that. And we've had to reduce our numbers significantly. What I would say is that, and this the point we've constantly made to all of our staff who are affected, is this absolutely isn't a statement about ineffectiveness or about things not working in the past. It's a statement about how things are going to have to be different in the future. We're no different than any other union in the world. You follow rugby around the globe, you'll know that down under in Australia and New Zealand, where COVID hasn't hit anywhere near as hard, the actual reductions that the New Zealand and Australian union have had to make are even more significant and severe than ours. Every other sport is doing it here. Football, we're ahead of us. Cricket are about a month behind us. So the impact on all of our revenues is significant. I think anybody on this call that works in business, or most people that work in business, have been affected in a similar way. And the second point to that is we need to keep remembering as well that the vast majority, 99+% of rugby is delivered by clubs and volunteers. And our role, in whatever shape we are, however size, however big an organisation we are, whatever resource we have, has to be to support those efforts. That's where we will reboot going forward. We'll have 100 less staff involved, but we will still have a network of club developers. We'll have a network of coach developers. We'll have other teams of people who will be out working with clubs and CBs to develop rugby. They'll just be doing it in a different way. We're going through the recruitment process for those posts at the moment. We're very much hoping that many of the people that are currently out there that you'll know as rugby development officers or community rugby coaches will secure those new roles. There'll just be less of them, and they'll be working in a different way. And that's going to be a challenge for us all. But what lockdown has showed us is there are different ways of working. We've had a lot of calls, a lot of virtual calls. We probably had more contact with many clubs during lockdown than we might do normally. It's a lot easier to get people on a Zoom call, a Skype call, a Teams call, a Google Hangouts call, or whatever. And that use of technology is definitely going to be part of our future. So we're feeling it as much as anybody. As I said at the start, you never want to let your colleagues go, but we must keep recognising that it's volunteers who ultimately deliver all sport, and particularly our sport.
What is the difference between these cuts now and the cuts that happened maybe 18 months ago? Because it was about 18 months ago that there was a first round of cuts, and now we've got a second round of cuts. Does that, are you not, some people will think that the community sort of been the one left behind here. Is that right? Is that fair?
I wouldn't say. I mean, the two situations and circumstances are vastly different. I mean, two years ago, we, as I think we said at the time, we had to make some reductions. We had to reshape our overall organisation. We had to reduce our cost base at that time, the broadcast market, and you have to constantly do this. If your costs are staying high, but revenues are coming down, you can't magic revenues out of somewhere. Therefore, you've got to do something about that cost base. We had to do that, unfortunately, 2 years ago. The scale of it was, tiny, really, compared to what it is now. This is entirely COVID related. There aren't too many organisations at the moment that are growing. I think you only need to open the actual newspaper or the virtual newspaper every morning, and you're reading again about companies in all sorts of different industries that are having to make reductions. We will still have a significant pool of people out on the ground, bigger than the majority of other governing bodies of sport in this country by several fold. And our job now really is just to maximise that and focus that effort and energy. Still having over 100 people out on the ground in community rugby, that's bigger than many of the other governing bodies of sport in their entirety.
Okay, so you're saying we lost 100 great men and women, but 40 of those will be reemployed as the new RDO, for example. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, well, we'll lose in total. We've lost just over 100 people from a rugby development team that was 230 strong. So we've lost it, but we've had to remodel in order to do that, because just trimming the numbers of the current structure, and again, many people that done organisational remodelling will know what you can't do is just take. You can't just say we'll have 25% less community rugby coaches and we'll have 30% less rugby development officers, because the reality is you're then asking them to cover a bigger area doing the same job, and it just gets to the point where the scalability of it is a lot less. So we ended up putting about 180 people at risk, 80 odd new roles created, 100 roles going, and people will hopefully they will transition into those roles. And it's very hard to know where to go. I mean, I know I see a question coming in about will the government actually intervene? Clearly, you're always talking to government, but government have made it pretty clear here that the level of their intervention is not going to be anything. They've been asked to intervene, aren't they, around every aspect of life at the moment, and they've made it pretty clear that they're not going to bail us out.
Okay. Okay. So, although 100 people were made redundant, 40 of them are essentially going to be re-employed. So net, it's 60 people that's been made redundant.
No, 180 people were put at risk, and 100 roles have been removed. So there'll be 100 less people. So 100 people will ultimately end up being made redundant. And I say ultimately because you're
so
still in
again,
a...
Yeah. So again, there's a question coming in from Samantha White. I'm involved in grassroots level, concerned about the reduced support on the local club game. I can obviously only talk for the clubs I'm involved with, also my club. We probably speak to our, well, we spoke to our RDO probably once in 4 years up until about 2 years ago, and then it's once every 6 months. If their times are now going to be significantly spread, are the clubs like mine, which is a very, very small club, one team, no assets, going to get less opportunities to have talks and development with their representative than perhaps a bigger club? Is that a fair statement?
No, I don't think so. I think what we will be doing is, I mean, not every club needs the support. Some clubs have maybe been over reliant on the support. Some clubs have had a disproportionately high level of support. Some haven't wanted any support. Some haven't had any support. So whenever resources are thinner on the ground, the challenge is going to be getting them to the clubs that need them most. And there are also a lot of opportunities, I think, to link clubs together that have got the same challenges. So, the bottom line is we've got about 1,200 voting clubs at the RFU. They're everything from, huge clubs running 4 or 5 adult sides, a couple of women's sides, big 800 strong mini and junior section, right down to a one team, 22 playing members that are operating out of a pub and everything in between. So if you've got 1,200 clubs, and we're going to have teams of club
We've got 15.
You've got 15 players, yeah.
Our 20 shrunk to about 15, 16. But we're exactly what you just said. One team,
yeah.
Barely 15.
The level of support you probably need is a lot less limited, really. So operating in a different way. So during lockdown, I've been involved every week, Monday and many weeks Tuesday evenings, with just a group of clubs in different areas of the country. Dead easy to jump on a Skype call for an hour with a group of 6 clubs. So I might argue you might expect the interaction to increase. I mean, I think many people are saying this. Why have we never done this before? The new norm is to jump on calls, isn't it? And to see 6, 8 faces and to be able to have an hour's meeting. And we've done it a lot lately where individual clubs have had a particular challenge they want to talk to us about, where it would have taken a long time to jump in a car, drive to the other end of the country, drive back for 4 or 5 people to do it. It's dead simple now. So this is going to be about working differently. And it's also going to be about helping clubs who are achieving great things on their own to share that with clubs that might be struggling a little bit. So moving probably more to a facilitator type role here, where we're connecting people and helping them ultimately to help themselves.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess the proof will be when we can actually get back playing rugby. We won't know until then, I guess. And you've filled the roles, and people are back getting rugby back on the park. Let's talk about rugby on the park. There's a question from Natalie. The men's numbers are shrinking at grassroots levels, while women's and youth playing numbers are growing. What advice would you give to increase male participation in rugby?
Yeah, it's a great question, Natalie.
Incredibly. Fantastic question. This is exactly what Philly Boots was born out of, was the fact that there was plenty of men's teams around the Surrey area that couldn't field a 15, including my own. So what can be done? What are the RFU going to put in place to help those numbers grow?
So I think it's a great question, and it's the nub of the challenge that faces the sport. And we often say that if you could if you could, if you had one wish, it would be to take a 15-year-old rugby player and turn them into a 25-year-old rugby player. All of our other problems would go away. I think the key thing here is that in terms of advice or suggestions to clubs, it's like you would do with any, and I know clubs don't see themselves as businesses, but in reality, that's what they are. Small businesses that have customers, stroke players coming into them. And in any other walk of life, you would listen to your players and you'd engage with your players and you provide something that they wanted. That means an offer that they want at a time that they want, at a frequency that they want. And I think the insight that we have on, adult male players is people don't live their lives anymore around 2:30 or 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, week in, week out. Everything is a lot more fluid, a lot more instant, a lot less organized, a lot less structured. And yet as a sport, we are still incredibly structured in terms of when matches are going to kick off, where we're going to play, who the opposition's going to be, and the expectation that we want people to play week in, week out. It's a huge commitment, isn't it? If you go back to the start of professional rugby, which is when many people would argue the whole thing began to change, or the introduction of leagues before that in the 80s and 90s, shops were shut on Sundays. They're shut at 5 o'clock on a Saturday. There was no online shopping. The whole world has changed, and yet we have to keep questioning how much we've maybe changed it. Some of the success in the growth of the women's game has been a much more flexible playing offer, less structure around maybe some of the leagues. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place for that. Not everybody wants that, but a more fluid and a more dynamic environment. If somebody wants to play rugby 8 times a year, once a month, where's the opportunity and the offer for them? So I think adaptability here is going to be key. More local fixtures. How many people nowadays can commit the whole of Saturday to travelling? Yes, there's still a group of people that want to do that, and there probably always will be. But equally, not everybody is in that position. What's wrong with pitching up on a Friday night? There are people that work Saturdays now. I know there are people that work Friday nights too, but you know what I'm saying, a more flexible, adaptable playing offer, which is how many other sports nowadays will run, and how a certain generation of players will want and expect to consume their rugby.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think I think your clubs have to do something slightly different now, I think, and evening rugby might be the way forward. And being if you can adapt your club to be different from the club down the road, then you might be able to attract the player. Steve has disappeared. Okay, so let's fill some time. Who's watching? Rugby Inside Line, thank you very much for everything you do for us. Mark Bryan, thank you for your question. As soon as Steve comes back, we are going to go with that. Heather too. Samantha, thank you. Steve's coming back in now. Let's
a pop-up came up, Sean, that kicked me out. I don't know what it was.
Some edit for the podcast. More work to do tonight. Welcome back. So on that then, we were just about what the male participation situation is. Is there a thinking that the Inner Warrior series for women works so well over the last couple of years? Is there some marketing strategy that we could put together that for exactly the same, but for the men's game?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because where the women's game's been really successful and a lot of the growth has come from has been introducing women, let's say between the ages of 16 and 24, I'm generalizing, but there's been significant growth in that area, and indeed with older players. And yet, if we talk to many male clubs and you talk to many males in that age group, they wouldn't even think about going and playing rugby for the first time. So if you think about it as a recruitment strategy, there's a huge amount that the men's game can learn from the women's game. Talk to many coaches and you talk to them about how easy is it to introduce a 25-year-old male to rugby, and you'll get the answer, it's really hard, it's difficult because everybody else has been playing for years and it's an early skill set and all that sort of stuff. And yet those same coaches actually find it incredibly easy to introduce women to the game because that's what we've had to do. So I find that a really interesting challenge, that the perception is you need to have started playing male rugby in your teens, and yet it's absolutely not the perception in the women's game. And I just think something like in a Warrior, where it's tried to actually play to many of the things that the women want from their sporting experience, where they do want that physicality, they do want that teamwork, they do want to be doing something that they've never tried before. And the challenge is getting that across into a male market. And I think particularly something we look at constantly is other team sports. So other team sport players who might want something that's a little bit more physical. But if you're an experienced team sport player, to go along and sort of just slot into a fourth 15 or a third 15 or a second 15, or in your case, Sean, just come and be a 16th player in your club, it's actually quite intimidating.
Absolutely, yeah. Is Returned Ready for Rugby? Could that be marketed as the way in for those types of sort of older males?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great fan.
There, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of non-contact or reduced contact rugby. Many people will say it's not the real thing, but I would rather have those players playing that with an oval-shaped ball in a rugby club than I would, going down to a local running club or going and playing five-a-side football, or going off and playing mixed netball or whatever it might be. And I think the other thing about Ready for Rugby, for those that haven't picked it up, is sort of the 10-a-side adaptation of touch that we've introduced to try and get rugby back on the agenda at the moment, when we know we can't do full contact rugby. And what we've done is taken the bones of the touch game, increased the number of players, and made it look a bit more like rugby union. And many people will know it as two touch. It's a just training activity, really adapted, but allows players to break the defensive line, has a bit more of a sort of invasion game feel to it, and is multi-phased. And I think one of the unintended consequences of it could be an ability to play in a mixed format, which we clearly have got in touch, but we haven't really ever had in rugby beyond once we get into our teenage years. And actually, when we profiled it for the media 10 days ago, when we announced it, we had some 15, 16-year-old boys and girls playing together. And it's a bit of an unintended consequence to see it, but they enjoyed it hugely because they were playing together. And there's another retention opportunity there. And I mean, believe me, the boys were absolutely blown away with the skill level of the girls. It was superb to watch. So I think there is something in that. We've got to break some of the traditionalism. If we, are we really worried if we've got 100 players now in our club, and we've still got 100 players in 10 years' time, but they're playing some different sorts of rugby, including full contact 15-a-side, but including some non-contact rugby? Is that not the sign of something that's adapting well and actually keeping players in our sport?
Definitely, 100% agree. More people better. Okay, so yeah, I think Ready for Rugby is a great idea. We played it last weekend. how far? I know you can't answer this particularly well, but how far away are we to moving to the next stage of the roadmap? And I know it's probably the $1 million question, and one you can't answer. But what indications have the government yourselves sort of been given that we might be moving to the next stage of the roadmap?
Yeah, so we'll the next stage on the roadmap is basically saying that we would move to, which would be stage D, on a A to F, where F is the full contact game. So stage D would see us allowing inter-club ready for rugby. So it would allow your club, Sean, to go down the road to another club. It would allow a group of 4 clubs to come together and play a sort of a tournament type activity. Now it's still non-contact, but at least it's allowing us to get back to being able to visit another club and play something vaguely competitive. And the other part of stage D would be to reintroduce some non-contact training. Now the first part of that is within our own control, the inter-club matches. The second part of it requires government approval again. So we submit tomorrow actually a plan for the contact. We've had to set out in there clearly what will and won't be allowed. So, you know, it's restricted activity. It's going to be around a reduced height tackle in training. It's going to be around a bit of line out work, but line out work that is just going to have to, as the ball comes down, be passed out. We're not in a position where we can start to form mauls or anything. And there's going to be some limited work around the breakdown. But at least what that would allow, if we could get that in, is some of the physicality to come back into the sport. I'm not sure if people are fully aware of the process that we've had to go through to get it approved by government, but you have to conduct a pretty extensive what they call an exposure risk assessment. So you've got to basically analyse a full game situation, and you've got to analyse every player, every position, and the amount of time that they have face-to-face contact with other players, and whether that is classed as fleeting, which is less than 1 second, or non-fleeting, which is between 1 second and 3 seconds. And then if it's over 3 seconds, you're right in the high level danger zone. And you then have to play out that that exposure risk framework against every position on the park. And what it shows in our sport is, unsurprisingly, that the sort of 3 really high red risk areas are in the scrum. And actually it's the setting of the scrum rather than the scrum itself. But the setting of the scrum just means we're in that red zone for a longer than acceptable period. In the tackle, and particularly the upright tackle, and again, if you just think there about a tackler running at pace at a tacklee, and as they hit, the tackler tends to exhale, the tacklee tends to inhale, and everything we know about this virus is that's where the problem is. And then the third area is around the line out. It's not so much the line out per se; it's the maul that ensues from the line out. So those are remain the really challenging areas, and they're just so red on a risk table. You may be aware Rugby League have got back, but Rugby League have removed the scrum. And of course, after a tackle in Rugby League, there's no breakdown. So it's just so different. So I would hope that we may move on at some point. I mean, hopefully early September, but this will all be now down to government and what they make of our plans. But to get some contact training back in training sessions, I'm sure many people would welcome.
Itching, I'm sure. Itching to get back.
Yeah.
I can't say I am, to be fair.
Oh, come on.
Need to lose some timber.
It won't be long. It won't be long.
Lockdown's not been kind. Lockdown's not been kind. We'll move on then. Why? This is from the Swanley Arsenals. Why are women's teams still waiting for their leagues to be announced when were released on the 15th of July?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be totally honest on this one. I've been trying to get an answer while we've been on the call because I saw it in the comments box when I locked on, and nobody's got back to me yet. So it might be one, Sean, I need to get back to you on, and you'll have to put up on the website.
Well,
In the I know in the early, no point me making up an answer. In the early stages
no,
of this,
I appreciate that.
yeah, in the early stages of this, the main reason was the size of the leagues, and people hopefully will have seen the three windows that were created, and the reality is that the larger the league, the less flexibility there is. Most of the women's leagues are significantly smaller, and hence there was the urgency, knowing that we were unlikely to go into that first phase. Just the pressure just wasn't on. But I totally get the comments in the box, and I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I will promise to get back to you on that and with a full explanation, because it's a very fair point.
I appreciate that, Steve. Said it could have been quite easy to make up an answer, but you didn't. So I really appreciate that. But keeping on the theme of the women's game and the brilliant women's game that we've got over here in England, this is from Heather. When can ladies sides start playing games on Saturdays alongside men's games? Sundays get low attendance and less coverage.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, no reason why that shouldn't happen. In the same way as there's nothing to stop a men's fixture happening on a Sunday or a Friday night. This is really down to, the two teams that are playing agreeing that they want to do that, and then I'm going to say the modernisation of some of the thinking maybe in some of the clubs. But I would encourage people to try and take action there. I know it's happened on a few occasions, particularly on some of the artificial pitches, where it's clearly an easier thing to do to play two back-to-back matches. I mean, I think it's a great move. I think it can only help club revenues. Maybe there's some on Saturdays and maybe there's some on Sundays, and you work it out and see what works best. But it takes us, doesn't it, to a typical sort of a Southern Hemisphere model where often you'll get 5 or 6 games literally played back to back on a day, from sort of junior games in the morning through to second 15s, women's teams, men's first 15s playing matches back to back. One of the challenges we have is our pitches and our weather. And there aren't that many grass, natural turf pitches, particularly in the wetter months that'll wear back-to-back matches. But I'd be a great supporter of it, and I'd say give it a go. In the same way as I think back-to-back Friday night matches with floodlights, it can only help the social side of the club, I would think.
Well, definitely, it's another day for revenue, isn't it? And that's what the clubs are crying out. Just like you said, with when we can get back to intra ready for rugby, they're getting people back in clubhouses and money behind the bar. It'll all benefit each other in the end. So this is we've answered the first part of this question already, but there's a second part of this that I believe. What is happening with the borrowing or loaning of players? For example, the Tyrrell's Premiership will have squads of 40. Where do the other 18 goes that aren't in a match day 22? It's a question, I guess, but I don't know if you're able to answer that one or not.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is about player availability as well, isn't it? And I was really struck recently. It's not that recently now. It would have been probably September, October time. Time has flown during lockdown, and it goes back to a similar question about the men's piece earlier and the challenge of having a squad. And I know the director of rugby in this particular club had showed me his sort of whiteboard of his 60 players and how there were only actually 20 available for that weekend. Another 20 so a third of the players available, a third of the players who were unavailable due to work commitments, holiday, just not, and the other third that were unavailable due to injury, and not necessarily heavy, hard-on rugby injuries, but things that, again, 20, 30 years ago, people would have played through. So soft tissue injuries or whatever. And I think there's an element of that in that 40-person squad as well. That I think it'd be very rare that of a 40-person squad, another 18 would be available. There'll always be an element of those that are injured, and then obviously the important thing is that the other players are enabled to get appropriate game time with other clubs. But it certainly won't be the sort of 50-50 numbers, I don't think, that we're talking about. All the evidence is, and you'll know this as well, if not better than I, much bigger squad now needed to get out a match day squad.
Yeah, definitely. The clock, and we're approaching sort of 5 minutes. I just wanted, I'll ask you one more. Just, I really appreciate your time. So this is from Chris. Do you think grassroots rugby will be playing inter-club fixtures? We've touched on that. Without in the new year, meaning, of course, bigger lads will be lost. The beauty of the game will be lost to many. Is this a worry?
Yeah, I think it's a very real worry. And if anybody's got any ideas about how we can do that whilst not, transmitting COVID, it's one for intergovernment really. I worry a lot about it. I worry not just about the bigger lads that are playing in the front row and the scrum. I just worry that for a lot of people, they want to play competitive fixtures. They want to play against another team, and I worry that if other sports are able to steal a march on us, and this is not about them being better prepared or having better data or being able to write a submission better. It's literally the face-to-face contact that we have to deal with. If we think we're badly off, imagine being judo or taekwondo or something like that at the moment, because they're really struggling to get any sort of activity going. People may have seen this week netball quite significantly affected by this, just because there's a huge amount of face-to-face contact in netball, so they've had to adapt their community game significantly. The crux ultimately is we'll have to try and engineer something, won't we, for the forwards to do. I mean, I'd still be optimistic that towards the end of the year, if not the start of next year, that we'll be back at some point with contact rugby. But if we get a second spike, and it's a big second spike, I think there's some pretty significant implications of that. And I think even as we have to be aware as a sport, even if we are allowed to get playing again, what we don't yet know is the impact that this is going to have on some players, family members that don't want them to go back into that sort of environment, players themselves that don't want to get back into that sort of environment. That the noises are all positive at the moment, but the longer this goes on into winter, and then the weather starts to cut in as well, and Christmas starts to cut in, and all of the other things that normally disrupt rugby throughout the season, being realistic about it, our challenge is getting bigger and bigger. And being totally honest about it, there's only so much we can all do about this. There's an element of this that's just literally out of our hands. We're all working 24/7 with all the challenges that we've got at the moment, but there is an element of there's no easy way to fix some of this.
No, I don't know if you saw, but we ran a survey sort of in the middle of lockdown. I'm just reading it because I would have brought it up earlier, but 1 in 20 players said that they wouldn't be returning to rugby at all post-COVID, and 1 in 10 are unsure whether they'll ever play again.
Yeah,
so that's quite a big number. a lot of people. We got 250 responses to our survey, and that was sort of the big takeaways from it. That 1 in 20 will saying that they're not going to play rugby at all. So I think a massive worry about what is next and what happens after that. And also on the bigger players part of the question. Sorry, Steve.
No.
Are we almost too healthy? Are we almost promoting too much? This will sound silly to anyone that's watching, but promoting, we're looking for a next generation of forwards and front row forwards. Are we being too healthy, perhaps?
Well, you mean there's not? I don't know. If you walk around the streets, you still see quite a few people, don't you? It's just we need to get them back into our game. I mean, I think it's been interesting in lockdown as well. The reports that you hear are that and it was one of our concerns as we started to think about getting rugby back, that half of our players were probably going to be fitter than ever, and half of our players were going to be a lot less fit than ever, because people had taken a choice, hadn't they? And either they'd bumped the pounds and the stones on, or they'd actually taken them off. So, and then you get an even bigger mismatch out on the field.
Perhaps a comment just coming. Given you ready to rugby, etc., perhaps Philly Boots should be running your survey. Perhaps there's a conversation after this about how we can, help that and get things going. I've got a great idea about 4-team ready for rugby. So we can have a conversation about that another day. Again, right. Steve, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but thank you so much for coming on, being so open, being really honest about everything that's going on. I'd love to do this again one day if you're up for it. I'm sure everyone watching here is really appreciated your time. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of bring up or talk about briefly before we call it a night?
No, I mean, just if I can just finish on thanking you for the opportunity and for all the great work that you're doing. Just bringing a community of people like this together is invaluable, particularly at a time like this. So thank you to you, and I'm happy to do this whenever. To people that have been on the I don't know what you call this really. What do we call it nowadays? Whatever. The people that have been listening in, thanks to you, and please take our thanks back to all of your clubs. We're privileged enough to get paid to do this. The voluntary work that goes on now, clubs length and breadth of the country, the sport wouldn't survive without it. So huge thank you on that. And I'm very happy to keep dialogue going with anybody that wants to. Our email addresses are pretty easy at the RFU to work out. It's first name. There's no dot in the middle. It's just first name, second name @rfu.com. I genuinely don't mind. Any thoughts, always open to them. There's no such thing as a bad idea at the moment. So please, if you've got any thoughts or you've got any more questions, don't feel afraid of pitching them in. Thanks again.
That's absolutely brilliant. If you want to get in touch with Steve that way. But yeah, again, thank you so much. Let's again, once we know a bit more what's going on. Again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I really appreciate your time. To everyone watching, thank you very much. You can watch this on demand on Facebook, on YouTube, as of now. It'll be a podcast tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. So in on Apple, Spotify, Google, everywhere. We'll stick links up. And join us again next week for another great topic. We're going to talk about mini and junior player recruitment and retention next week. So we've got another great panel lined up. So tune in then. If you want to know anything, Boots, go on FY. If you've never with me or heard of what we do, go and check us out. And we'll see you again. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you.
Cheers. No problem. Take care. Cheers.